Hello again, I'm Wendy J. Haney, and today I'm going to show you how to make the Sawtooth Star quilt block. Yep, it's a really pretty block, and it's fairly straightforward to make, but oh, it can make some really pretty things, and you can do it in a variety of sizes. This quilt block is really squares, middle, corners, and 4 flying geese. So I'm going to show you how to do this really simply because there's a method to make 4 flying geese at one time. So let's get started. The Sawtooth Star block that we want to create is going to be a 12.5-inch unfinished block. Flying geese are, the height is half the length. So if we want our block to be 12-inch finished, the center will be 6, the 2 flying geese will be 3 inches high. That means they need to be 6 inches long. Therefore, we're going to need to cut a 6.5-inch block from our star fabric, our center fabric, and then the flying geese are going to be 6.5 by 3.5 inch unfinished. So to make 4 flying geese all at the same time, we've got a really great method to do that. And the way we do that is we start with a block of fabric and then add little squares to it and cut and slice and dice it. And I'm going to show you how to do that. But let's first cut the fabric that we need. I was hoping that I could get 4 blocks out of 2 fat quarters, a fat quarter of the background and a fat quarter for the star fabric. Sadly, works fine for the background, but not when it comes to the star. The star, I only can get 3 pieces, 3 of the fabric cuts I need for the blocks out of this. With that said, if you want to go scrappy with your stars, then I would suggest you buy fat quarters for your stars and then buy yardage for your background fabric to make sure you have enough of it. And that's a good way to do it. So right now I'm starting with a fat quarter because that's what I have, so I'm going to just show you how I'm cutting it. If you're trying to get multiple blocks out of here, what I would suggest you do is the center square needs to be 6.5 inches square. So cut them this way. You can do 1, 2, 3 6.5-inch squares this way. For our flying geese, we need a bunch of 4-inch squares. So then you can get 2 rows of 4-inch squares this way. Okay, and then our background fabric, we need to cut a 7.5-inch square. So that's really easy to do. If you've got a fat quarter, you can get 7.5, 1, 2, 3, 4, and you're good to go. Otherwise, cut strips from your yardage. Okay, hopefully that didn't confuse you too much. So we're going to cut out our center pieces first. So we're going to cut our 6.5-inch strips. And you know what? Yeah, let's do that. I'm going to use this whole piece of fabric that I have. Now, I have this ruler. Sadly, it is only 6 inches wide, not 6.5. So, slickest thing to do is to get another ruler. I have a 6.5-inch ruler here, and we're going to just, there's my 1/2-inch edge, so we're going to put that here, and I'm going to give myself a little wiggle room, because this time I am not trimming up over here to straighten this out. It just, you know what, we're going to have to trim a little bit anyway to get our squares, so I just slid this up to make sure that if I cut my strip here, that I'll still have enough to get my 6.5-inch over. And I do, I'm fine. So we're gonna cut essentially a 6.5-inch strip of fabric. And then what we'll do, and in this case, right now, I need just 1 square because we're going to make 1 block. And I know you're going, wow, why'd you cut a whole strip if you need 1? Well, actually, I'm going to finish cutting these into multiple because I'm going to make a couple blocks. You're just not going to see me make more than one. Okay, so I've got this nice Omni Grid ruler that is a 6.5 inch square. Cut that, trim off the little extra that I had over here, and I have my 6.5 inch square fabric for the center of our star. Okay, so the next thing we need is 4 inch squares. So now, to do our flying geese, here's how it works. You need your background fabric. And your background fabric is this. This is my background fabric. And for this, you take the length of your finished flying geese, which for us, the finished length we want is 6, and you add 1.5 inches. So that means we're going to cut a 7.5 inch square of this fabric. Then to make the wings on the flying geese, we need a bunch of squares. We need 4 squares. We need 4 squares. And the size of those squares is you take your finished height of your flying geese. And so for us, that's 3 inches, and you add 1 inch to it. That means we're going to cut 4 inch squares. This method, I consider it no waste. On the other hand, these are just about 1/8 of an inch larger than you need, therefore allowing you to trim them up slightly, which I actually prefer, but you don't have a lot of waste. So I'm considering it no waste. And I'll show you how to trim these up if you have the wing clipper tool or if you don't. So since I already have a good straight edge here, I'm going to cut a 4 inch strip of fabric. Once again, if you're doing this scrappy, then go ahead and get a small ruler, your Omni Grid, and go ahead and cut 4 inch squares out of your fabric. In this case, I much prefer strip cutting. So there we go, there's my 4 inches. And as you can see, I'm easily going to be able to get another 4 inch strip out of here. And with this being 22 inches, I can get 5 4 inch blocks from here. So actually 1 more than I need. So that will be slick. Okay, so we've got that. And then I'm going to, we can do this like this. I oftentimes don't do this, but I'm gonna fold it in half. And I'm going to trim up this one edge over here that's got because I know I have plenty of room. I'm going to trim off that selvage. I'm going to flip it around, making sure that my edges are nice and square. This is going to allow me to cut 2 4 inch squares at a time. So here's 2 4 inch squares, and I need 2 more. So there's 2 more, and then if I was doing more of these and wanted to cut more, I could flip this open and I could get, I'm just going to cut it since I'm here. I could get another 4 inch block. And then this is, oh, that's a nice 2 inch strip. That's worth keeping. Okay, so now I've got my center, which is a 6.5 inch. I've got my 4 inch blocks for my wings of my flying geese. And now, get this out of the way, we're going to cut the background fabric. And this was a fat quarter until I totally screwed up and cut a 6.5 inch square out of it instead of a 7.5 inch square, which is what we need. I should know better than to be doing videos at this time of the day, but here we are. Okay, so my selvage is over here. I have an 8.5 inch square. So in this regards, I need a 7.5 inch. So I'm going to just put that here a little bit. So I have enough to trim around it to get rid of my selvage. So sometimes you're not doing strip piecing. You're just cutting out a block, which is what this is. Then we flip it over, and now we've got a straight edge on two sides. And I can finish that. Okay, so now we've got that. Now we've got our pieces cut out. So now we can do something with them. Now that we have things cut out, I want to clarify one thing. I was wrong. Out of the Sawtooth Star color, you can only get 2 blocks out of a fat quarter. You can only get 20 4-inch squares, and you can't get enough to get that 3rd block. So that's so basically you can get 2 blocks out of a fat quarter of the background and a fat quarter of the colored. There you go. So, okay, so we're gonna set aside the middle color, the 6.5-inch squares. We're gonna set that aside for now because we don't need that till the very end. Now we're gonna make our 4 flying geese. And we make that using our background fabric, which is a 7.5-inch square. And we're going to put, in this case, I've got batik. So it's the same on both sides. But if you had non-batik fabric, you're gonna put right sides together, and you're gonna put these squares up in the corners of your background fabric, just like this. As I mentioned, we're gonna do a method that gives you a little wiggle room. So there we have it. Then what we're gonna do is, we can do it one of 2 ways. You can either get a ruler and draw a diagonal corner to corner, and then you're going to take it to the sewing machine and sew a 1/4 inch on either side. Or you could take something like the magic wand here, and you could lay it on here, match up your corners, just like that. Doesn't really matter which side is which. Lay it on there, match up your corners, make sure your corners are pointed right there in the middle, and get a marking pen that you can see on this fabric. I've got a sew line with a white chalk in it that I can see. And then I'm just marking, and it moves when I do this on both sides of the line. This is why I prefer to actually just mark my center instead of trying to have something like this and mark on both sides of the line. But there we go. There. That's pretty good. So now I've got my stitch lines. By doing it this way, you're actually putting your stitch lines in. If you did it corner to corner, you'd want to sew on either side of the line. Now, with that said, if you drew the line in the middle, corner to corner, then hedge towards the center when you're stitching. And even with this line, hedge towards the center. It gives you a little wiggle room to trim, and that line does have a width to it. Okay, so we're going to, in this case, you definitely do not want to attempt to move these to your sewing machine after you've marked them without pinning them in place. So I'm going to pin these, and then we're going to go sew our 2 lines. Okay, I have my seams, not my seams, I stitched on my lines a 1/4 inch there away from the center. So now all we're going to do is, you can either take a scissors, or I'm kind of particular and I come back to my cutting table and I cut right down the middle, corner to corner. Therefore, I have my 1/4 inch seam. Okay? Then we take these and we press them to the wings. I call these the wings, okay? I finger press them, and then I take them to the iron and give them a nice and good press. Okay, we've got those, my little hearts. So here's a set that I already have pressed. Now, we still have 2 4-inch squares left. So here's what we're gonna do with them. You're gonna take one and do pretty much what you just did before. You're going to put them in the corner of this block. Now, with that said, you can do this marking either before you put this on the block or not. So I'm going to do it before, and then I'm going to show you, because to me it's easier to mark ahead of time. And if you don't happen to have a handy dandy magic wand to mark a 1/4 inch on either side of the center, and that's the way you would prefer, guess what? No problem. Draw your center line. Mark your center line. And then take your ruler and put a 1/4 inch mark on your center line. Whoopsie. And now don't move it. And then draw a 1/4 inch on that side of the line. Flip it. And this way for me is easier because then I also am not trying to draw on two sides of the ruler, the line. So there we go. You've got that. And we're going to do the same thing on this one. Lickety split while I'm here. And usually I just draw the center line because I have a 1/4 inch foot on my sewing machine, which means it's really easy for me to put the 1/4 inch mark of the foot here, and it ends up stitching there. It's very handy. And if your sewing machine has that, you may just want to mark the center. Okay, so back to putting these on your squares. Obviously, you're going to put it in the corner, right sides together. Key thing, make sure your lines are going this way. Do not have them going that way, or you won't get the results you want. Okay, so we're going to put those on there, and guess what we're going to do? I know. You've heard it before. We're going to pin them. And then you're going to go to the sewing machine, and you're going to stitch a 1/4 inch. Either stitch on your lines, hedging towards the center, or stitch a 1/4 inch from that center, depending on how you marked your squares. And then we'll be back. So we have our 2 pieces sewn a 1/4 inch from the center on both of them. And we're going to do exactly what we did before. We're going to cut right between those seams. And now we have 4 flying geese. We're going to press that up, finger press them up. I always press out towards the wings on each of these. And now you have 4 of them that are almost the size you need. Not quite. They're a tad too big. Okay, so there we go. There's our 4 flying geese. Now, I already have a set that I have pressed, so I can show you how we need to trim them up. I prefer using the wing clipper from Deb Tucker's wing clipper. I prefer this. It's the most accurate, it's easy, but I realize not everybody has a wing clipper. That's okay. You can use a regular ruler. What I discovered though, so in this case, what you need to do is, this is 6.5 inches unfinished this direction, and 3.5 inches unfinished that direction. That's the way they need to get cut. And it's important that this point where our wing intersects, it needs to be a 1/4 inch down from the top, so when we sew our wings onto other blocks, we don't chop off the point. And that center spot, that dot, should be halfway. Because we've got a 6.5 inch block, the halfway is 3.25. Obviously, depending on what size you're doing, those measurements are going to differ. So you need to do a little math. Your unfinished length divided by half. So here's 3 1/4, and my Omni Grid ruler actually has this nice little dot that's right there, 3 1/4, and then my 1/4 inch down. So I want that dot right there on the point. Now, this ruler doesn't allow me to have angles to see if my angles are right, but that's okay. I don't need that. What you need to do is go down here to the bottom. Here's our 3 1/2 inches. That's how tall this needs to be. Those 3 1/2 inches there, and it's 6 1/2 inches wide. So 6 1/2 inches is right here. You go down 3 1/2 inches, and there's a dot. And those need to be right at the corner, at the intersection of your fabrics where it changes. So if that happens, 1/4 inch down and 3 1/4 inches over is your point for the top of your triangle. Over here, right at 3 1/2 inches, it should hit the corner of your fabric where your fabric switches. And then over here, 6 1/2 inches over, 3 1/2 inches down, there's a point and it's right on the edge. And that means I don't have anything to trim off the top except this little edge there. And this I'm going to hedge a tad up. So you might not have to trim very much, but I have to trim a little bit over there. There we go. Okay? And then we flip it around. Now, if that was all done right, I should be able to just put this 6 1/2 inches over. Make sure your dot is right there at your 3 1/4. 3 1/2, 6 1/2 wide, 3 1/2 down. Your points, your corners there should match. And now you trim off the rest. And there we go. If all looks good, your fabric should intersect nicely at the corners, and your point should be right in the middle and a 1/4 inch down. And there you go. You have a very nice, perfect flying geese. And this is all you trimmed off. So almost no waste. We're going to call it no waste. Okay, so you're going to do that on all 4 of them. Now, if you happen to have a wing clipper, then it's really a lot easier because your wing clipper says, oh, you have a 3 1/2 inch flying geese? Then 3 1/2 by 6 1/2, then it has a little X right there that says this is where you put your intersection at there. And then down here and down here, it's got your square for your 6 1/2. And this block needs to be shifted just a tad. Sometimes I need to tug them a little bit to ensure they're square. So essentially, you're doing the exact same thing I showed you with the regular ruler. The only benefit here is that they have your exact lines drawn. It's 6 1/2 inch this way, it's 3 1/2 inch this way. There's the X marks the spot for your angle. That is the benefit of this ruler. But you're getting the same. And if I'm doing one flying geese at a time, so then once you flip it, you do the same thing. You line up your 6 1/2, your 3 1/2. I'm gonna just, where's my purple thing when I need it, doggone it? There we go, just need a little tug on that one. Then we're gonna trim the other side. What I was gonna say, started to say, is if I was making one flying geese at a time, I had the wing clipper tool, I would follow the instructions and the exact measurements it tells me to do the squares and the blocks from the wing clipper tool. And I think in that situation, I trim off a little more. Not a lot, but a little more. Either way, this works and you don't need the wing clipper. Once you know the math, and I'll make sure the math is in the pattern that shows, depending on what size flying geese you need, what size large block and what size small squares that you need to create. I am not going to make you sit here and watch me trim up the rest of my blocks. I'm going to go do that, and then we'll be able to start putting things together. Okay, now we're ready to start putting things together. And I realized I goofed. I forgot to tell you about one other piece of fabric you need to cut from your background, and that is 4 3.5-inch squares. Did I say something about doing videos late at night not being a good idea? Yeah, I'll make note of that earlier in the video for those of you that, yeah, I will. Anyway, so you will have seen it there. You'll still be fine being able to get 2 of these blocks from 2 fat quarters. Okay, so we have our 4 wings. We have our center fabric, which is 6.5-inch square. And what we do is we just put our wings around the edges to make our star. Look at there, that'd be perfect. And then I did that and I went, we're missing the corners. So that means we need 3.5-inch squares in our corners. There we go, look at there. Now we have a pretty 12.5-inch Sawtooth Star block. Oh, I really, really like this block, even though I'm not particularly partial to flying geese. But when you can make them 4 at a time, it really helps when making this block. I think this would make a really pretty scrappy quilt, table runner, whatever. And I think I have enough fabric that I'm going to be able to have 2 blocks at least and be able to do something with a table runner. Okay, so now we need to put it together. Easiest thing to do is work in, I work this way, is 1, I like to have my seams up. So this way I'm going to put that over there. This one I'm going to put there, so my seam is up. And this one I'm going to put there. I know, it's a little bit weird, but then I'm going to just pick this up and I'm going to straighten it out and I'm going to pin it. Make sure my edges are nice and neat. And this way I pin it so I know which edge I'm sewing. Okay? Got that. I'm going to do the same with this one up here. Okay. Whoopsie. I've decided I've become partial to these magic pins. They're easier to grab hold of. Okay, so I've got that, and then we're going to do this. Okay? Now, key thing with flying geese, and this is the reason I want my seams up, is because, and when I stitch a 1/4 inch across there, I should hit exactly on that point of this seam. Therefore, I won't chop off the point of my flying geese. Now, I could easily pin all of this together, even these edges, but what I prefer to do is I will take these 3 pieces to the sewing machine, I will sew them, I'll bring them back, position it correctly, and then put these on and sew another row. So I'm going to show you how to do that just to make sure there's no oopses in this one. Okay, so we've got these 3 pieces sewed together, and I already went to the ironing board and pressed them. This center piece I press towards the square. Basically, all you have to remember is press towards the square, not the wing. So this got pressed that way, this got pressed that way, this got pressed that way. This is going to make your seams nest very well when you put things together. So now the next piece is we have 1 more row that we need to add on. So I will fold this over and pin that. I'm going to fold that over there and pin it, and that over there and pin it. So I'm going to do just what I did with the other. 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch, 1/4 of an inch. Okay? And I already have a set where I've done that to speed things up a bit. Okay, so we have, let's see, there's our center row. there's our top, and there's our bottom. So this is what you're going to end up with after you stitch those other seams that I just told you. And these are pressed, same thing. Press towards the square, press towards the square, press towards the square. Now that you've got these, it's the final step. We're going to sew the rows together. We're going to flip these over. And in this case, I want this on top once again so I know where my point is so I don't lose the point of that. So I'm going to flip this over because it's easier for me to pin this way. And I'm going to match and nest my seams. And they should nest nicely because of the way we pressed them. And then there's nothing to match there. So really, this block is pretty straightforward in getting your seams nested for your edges, and then match your corners. And we're gonna make this pretty straightforward. So there we go. So you're gonna sew 1/4 inch. Then this comes on here. You know what? And it's pretty easy to pin both of these correctly and take them to the sewing machine in one step instead of doing this twice. So I'm gonna nest my seam. I always nest my seams first because I can always do a little bit of tugging, so to speak, or adjusting, easing things in if I need to for the rest of the block. But I want my seams to match my outside and my edges. Okay, so now 1/4 inch there, 1/4 inch there, and we've got our Sawtooth Star block. And there we have it. Isn't that cool? This is such a pretty block. This is a 12.5 inch block. There's no reason why you can't do the math and do an 8.5 inch or a 6.5 inch. So basically a 12, 8, or a 6 finish block. You could combine a variety of different sizes in one table runner, quilt, whatever. All of a sudden, I've got some ideas. I'm just really loving this. I really wish I had more of both of those fabrics, but right now, all I had was enough to make 2 blocks. So, either they're gonna get set in a bin and eventually they'll get combined with something else in a scrappy format, or I'll figure out how to make a table runner with them, with a little bit of sashing. So, there you have it. That wasn't hard, was it? Take care, and thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for watching. I very much appreciate it. If you want to make sure you don't miss a single video I published, hit the subscribe button below and then hit the bell icon. And that way you will be notified whenever I publish a new video. But you can also find me over on Facebook, facebook.com/Wendy, the initial J, Haney. Or I have a Facebook group for those of you that love quilting, needlework, books, wine, and wellness. You can find that at facebook.com/groups/lifefulfilled. The name of the group is Life Fulfilled - Quilting, Needlework, Books, Wine, and Wellness. You can also find me over on my website, wendyjhaney.com. I will be doing more blogging over there eventually. As I get more of my videos done, I'll be blogging about those. But also, maybe you see some things that I'm making here and you're going, ooh, wow, I just don't want to make that myself. Well, a lot of those products will end up over there on the website that you can purchase for your friends and family. Once again, thank you so much for your support, and I appreciate you watching.